And that's if anyone would like to ask a little bit or any discussions, have any questions around the CDMP, please join us there and we'll try to help you, explain to you what it's all about, and what you need to do. And then we've got fundamentals training. If any of you are interested in the fundamentals, we know we have Penelope on here who's just finished a course. She's busy going through the study group, preparing for it. These are the different dates. So if you'd like to contact any one of us, please, we'd really love to help you and help you go through that. Now, we're just about to release a DIY CDMP course. And so if you'd like to be some of our beta testers, we have sort of closed it on LinkedIn, but we're asking for some beta testers that would be happy to almost write the exam in 2 weeks. So what we've got is a set of quizzes that we believe are very, very important and can provide you with a large number of exact questions in the quizzes that are there. And these quizzes, you can use the quizzes to learn. And I was actually sharing with Penelope is sometimes reading that DMBOK, it takes you forever. I've seen some study groups that go on for 12 weeks. And when you get to week number 9, 10, and 11, you sort of forgot what you did on week number 1. So it's just an approach we take to writing the exams. And we'd love to get your feedback. Of course, it requires the fact that you can, it's basically for free, but it does require the fact that you've purchased the CDMP exam and you'd be willing to write, and you just help share your feeling about the material that we have. We've got a summary developed by Veronica. That's a summary of the entire DMBOK, so it's not the 628 pages. It's a lot shorter. We've got video recordings, we've got mind maps, and then an online group discussion board. So if any of you have interest, please share your email with us. What it does require, what it does require is that you've worked with the DMBOK, with the CDMP, because to get this thing done in 2 weeks, you don't want to be in a situation where you've never seen anything in the DMBOK and you now want to start from the beginning. You won't make it. Okay, so part of the criteria is that you've had some DMBOK experience and you've been working in the field of data management for some time. Okay, so if you want to do it, to be able to run it yourself, if you want to get that CDMP purchased, that would be fantastic. All right, so the next thing that we wanted to just share with you is please remember that the CDMP, the actual CDMP requires 3 exams, the fundamentals, specialist number 1 and specialist 2. That's what you have to do. And then you have to make sure that you get those 3 before the final CDMP expires. JG, which ones are you going to do and when?
No, that's good. It's good that you asked, because it's getting past that CDMP is a proper hurdle, and then you realize you're only a third of the way.
Fantastic. All right, but sure, we can help you with data governance, data quality, data architecture, data quality, metadata, data integration. So there's quite a few that you'd like to do. All right, JG, all over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Howard. And Erwin, such a privilege to have you on our DAMA meetup today. Really is great to have thought leaders in our community joining us, and so real privilege to host you today. And I'm really excited about the presentation that you offered to the BI IT Web participants almost maybe 6 weeks ago now. Such an incredibly opportune time, I believe, that you're presenting this to us, because you're going to be talking to us, why is it that if you just offer self-service BI, why doesn't that solve the problem? And I'm really excited about the next layer that you're going to be lifting for us in terms of the, just cognitively, how are we wired? And so this is a real a showpiece of actually how we approach problems, where our biases come from. And so, Erwin, super excited that you're presenting that to us. And I'm almost lead in with the question that we'll ask at the end, and that is, what biases are being introduced right now with the likes of a chat GPT and those decision support nuances that we might be excluding or rushing past right now. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, really looking forward to Q&A. Erwin, if it's okay, I'm going to manage the chat. If there's a question that I think works, and I'll ask that I interrupt you and pose it to you. But other than that, we will we'll make sure we cover those at the end.
Perfect. Thanks for the kind words and the great introduction. That's you're setting some expectations here now, eh? So I've only got 2 slides, guys, about decision intelligence. No, it's a couple of more. But really, thanks so much for having me on the session. It's always great to connect with data professionals and have meaningful conversations and share experiences and thoughts. Just maybe a little bit about the logistics that you're talking about now, JG. I've got a couple of experiments that I've got in this presentation as well. So do you normally let people speak out freely, or does everything go via the chat? So I'm just doing a couple of quick response slides just now. And I would like people to sort of give some answers to that, to see what their thoughts are.
Erwin, how would you like to handle it? They can put their hand up, they can talk, or they can put it in the chat. Which one would you prefer?
Maybe in the chat. Maybe the chat. Otherwise, it might become a bit chaotic.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Happy to do that.
invite people when I say, okay, cool, let's go into that section. I'm keen to hear what you guys see, because I've got a couple of social experiments to show how we are biased in our decision making. Let's go via the chat. That would be great. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. So again, thanks so much for the introduction. Really great to be in this session. And yeah, hopefully it's going to be a meaningful session, and looking forward to people interacting and asking questions and that sort of things. So let me just share my screen again. Great. You guys can still see this, eh?
Yes.
Perfect, 100%. And I have to say, Howard, must I address you as Data Sherpa? Just wanted to ask that.
It's a Debbie thing, but yes, if you would like to.
Okay. Because I saw JG's presentation at the IT Web conference, and I thought it was great how you guys got introduced there. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, transitioning from business intelligence to decision intelligence, and what's so interesting about this topic is that it's of course very topical. It's very current. There's a lot of talk about decision intelligence these days, and maybe to JG's earlier comment, it's how biased are we these days as well, with tools like ChatGPT, for instance, and interesting to look at it. How does it influence our decision making? And I think the answer is that it's not that clear cut, because if you look at our own decision making that we are doing with our own brains, and how our own brain can actually fool us in certain situations as well, it's not a difficult jump to make to see how people that have put these large language models together can then bring their own biases into these kind of AI models. So hopefully this presentation will shed a bit more light on it. And I always like to start these presentations with a bit of a quote. I love this from this Scottish poet, Andrew Lang. And that's maybe a bit of an introspective question, whether we use statistics like a drunken man uses a lamppost more for support than illumination. And it comes back in decision intelligence. Sometimes we use a lot of statistics without actually really understanding the implications of that. And indeed, is it just to send a message and prove a point, or are we actually really looking at it with a scout mentality and try to look at things differently? Anyway, having said that, let me see if all of this stuff here is working now. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So a bit of an agenda for today. So introductions, quick experiment. So that's where the chat will come into play. We'll talk a bit about some of the challenges that a topic like business intelligence has experienced over the last couple of decades. We'll talk a bit about how the brain deals with decision making. And I don't know if there are any people here on the session that have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Slow and Fast. Some of you that might recognize some of the experiments that we are doing here. And then we'll carry on with what is decision intelligence and how do you get started, and a bit of a conclusion. Yeah, if there's any feedback, any questions, please feel free, and then JG will moderate from that perspective. Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to put my presentation view over here. Cool. So let's move on. Just a quick introduction so that you guys know who this guy is that you're talking to. I'm just saying always up front, the accent is Dutch. So because otherwise you just like, at the end of the session, you're still wondering, is it German? Is it Swedish? Is it Belgian? No, it's Dutch. I was imported in 1994 by my lovely wife. So here's just a couple of personal things. So I like to play a lot of music, write music for my own band, and I was in the Netherlands up until I was 32. But I really fell in love with the African continent. I traveled a lot when I studied, and I have to say, Asia didn't do it for me. South America didn't do it for me, but Africa really got under my skin. I always say the right ratio between space, people, and animals. So yeah, I've been for 25 years in the BI and data space. Anything from master data management to data analytics, data science. And did some very exciting projects in that space. When I came to South Africa, I worked together with Keith Jones at Harvey Jones. That's also, I think, where I first bumped into JG as well, quite a while back. Then I was for over a decade at Elton Carabina, looking after the data and analytics consulting services arm. And currently I'm looking after about 85 data professionals at Intellect, making sure they stay on the straight and narrow with their delivery. And that is really ranging across data science, data management, data engineering, data analytics, all those kind of topics. Okay, but enough about me. We'll get to know each other a bit better. So like I said just now, let's do a very quick experiment, and people, please use the chat to give me some answers. Okay, the theory of perception. So those of you that are not familiar with this, it is a social science concept. And when we talk about making decisions, we have to understand that people can describe the same thing objectively in very different ways. And you can still be right. So I'm going to show a couple of pictures quickly and give you a couple of seconds to respond in the chat to see what you actually think that the picture represents. Okay, is everybody ready? Here we go. Okay, let's do an easy one to get into it. Okay, what do you guys see here? Bring those comments. Okay, rabbit and a hare. Okay, rabbit and a duck. Anybody else? A head of a bird. Yeah. Okay. A rabbit. Yeah. Correct. Buddy. Yes. Especially with Easter recently in our minds. So indeed, it's depending on the angle, you can see either a duck or a rabbit, right? So a rabbit, duck. I hope not with a D. That sounds dangerous. Okay, let's go on to the next one. What do you guys see here? And I can tell you that it's not a rabbit or a duck. Well, if you see a rabbit or a duck in it, then you've got a very interesting way of looking at things.
I can see a lady.
Yes. So I see a lot of people here see indeed both sides. There's the older lady and the young lady, indeed, depending on how you look at it. So this here could be the nose of the old lady, and this here the mouth, but you could also look at a young lady from the side. Okay, another one. What do you guys see here?
Two gentlemen.
Two faces. Yeah. Hey, nice to see you here as well, Elrise. Candlestick. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think everybody is correct here. Now, and of course, the last but not least, the most difficult one comes at the end here. What do you guys see here? Ah, nurse. Frog. Okay, frog, frog, frog. A punctured frog. Anything else, guys? Ah, a horse. Excellent. Who else sees a horse? Fish. Okay. So indeed, this is a frog and a horse, right? The frog is maybe a bit easier to see, but if you tilt your head a bit to the right, then you might see a horse's head. Okay. Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for all your feedback here. So this is really about the theory of perception, and that's at the base of decision making. So if you look at this, what we did just now, and being able to describe things very differently and still objectively be correct. Imagine what that can do to decision-making processes in your organization when different actors are actually making important decisions. All right. So thanks for participating in that small experiment. Let's have a look at business intelligence. Okay. Because decision intelligence is a new power term, and the predecessor, business intelligence, has done a lot of goods in businesses, right? It's brought a lot of insights, but there were some challenges with business intelligence, especially self-service business intelligence. If we look here, I mean, I'm sure that everybody has seen these kind of typical catchphrases around BI. And I still remember with Harvey Jones as well. That's like, we dealt a lot with ProClarity at the time, and these kind of catchphrases were not unheard of. Yeah, better decisions, faster, actionable intelligence. So I'm sure that more than one of you on the call here has been guilty of using these kind of phrases themselves. I mean, I've been guilty of it. I've used this all the time. And the intent of BI has always been to solve a really common problem. It was very easy. How can organizations really make sense out of a mountain of data that they have in their organization without being an expert in query languages, database technology, or statistics? And along the way, a lot of BI solutions bumped into all sorts of problems. Data quality issues, which is probably no unknown topic for you guys from a DAMA perspective. There was all sorts of data availability issues, maybe hard to understand database structures that people got exposed to, just to name a few. So, and if we look as well at another sort of like topic that has been very often mentioned when it's was about comparing BI platforms and BI tools. We all know the Gartner Magic Quadrants, right, for the different areas. And Gartner's Magic Quadrant for analytics and BI platforms really looks at and always had a history of looking at a lot of different components: security, cloud enablement, metadata, natural language queries, data storytelling, of course, normal reporting and visualizations. And what was interesting was that actually a lot of focus was placed on the functionality of BI tools themselves. It was more of a race between Tableau, Power BI, ClickView, to be the most complete, easiest to use, fastest, most flexible, very cost-efficient tool. And in recent years, it really seems that Power BI, Microsoft Power BI, has sort of risen to the surface as one of the strong contenders. And yes, that's what is shown here in this particular Magic Quadrant as well. However, I'd like to mention here that the real challenges within BI have always been overshadowed by technical prowess. Where people always were discussing capabilities of BI tools and platforms. Unfortunately, technically inclined people often dominated BI discussions, and they really focused on these kind of features and the infrastructure required, the costs, rather than spending enough time on the actual business decision-making requirements. So in other words, the short of it, as is shown on this slide, a lot of the discussions focus on the means rather than the end, right? I don't know if you guys have got similar experiences, but after having been in BI as well for 2.5 decades, I do think that there was a strong element of, let's focus more on the technical abilities between tools, because it's maybe a bit easier to focus on than the hard thing of looking into someone's brain and see how do they actually make decisions. That's far scarier. So we carry on with this then. What is an important aspect, of course, of why BI may be not always delivered. And I'm saying maybe here specifically because I've done a string of really amazing projects where BI did bring super functionality to the business and really helped businesses propel forward. But at the end of the day, what's very interesting is from a social science perspective, and if you look at us humans, we are corner cutters. We love to preserve energy, especially when it comes to decision making. So, and as I said earlier, not enough time was actually spent on the topic of decision making itself. So if you look at the area on this slide here, what business intelligence was really good at was turning data, that mountain of data, into information. And we did that by adding context, adding relevance, and then ultimately we hope that the person consuming those reports and dashboards, fueled by great quality data, of course, with your data management frameworks, leads to the right understanding and decision making and actions, of course. So yeah, that was actually quite a challenge. And if we look at it as well, in this era, in the last couple of decades, we can maybe see a trend as well where gut feel decisions were to a certain extent romanticized. I mean, if we look at these two characters here, I mean, we all know them. But if you get a lot of emphasis on the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and following your heart and your intuition, they somehow know what you want to become. Even though I think that the intuitive mind is indeed really a great gift, and with intuition you can get very far, and there's a lot of value add from that. Maybe it's not always the best way to deal with decision making with intuition. So some scary statistics here. On average, organizations only use 50% of available information for decision making. 24% of executives make decisions based on data. And more than half of Americans, this was a study done by the University of Ohio, rely on their gut to decide, even when faced with contrary evidence, right? So I mean, as data people, we probably think, yeah, right, where did you get these numbers from? So I've got the research to back it up, so I can share these things with you as well post the session. But these are just some numbers that make you think, what do we do to actually factual decision making? I can hear somebody blowing their nose, so please maybe mute yourself if you can, unless that was intentional to draw attention for asking a question. All right, cool. So getting back to this section here. So anyway, so yeah, gut feel decisions were romanticized, and even though there's a lot to be said for gut feel, it's maybe not always the right mindset to tackle decisions. And that's what I'll chat about just now as well, is that there's actually an engineering approach that you can take to taking decisions and making decisions, and especially also in the context of an organization when you have to collaborate with multiple people. You can engineer these things. All right. So on the topic of decision making, let's delve into a bit more detail there. So this is the point where the people that read Daniel Kahneman's book, Slow and Fast Thinking, I saw somebody comment as well that it was a great book, but please can I ask you to refrain from answering this or partaking in this test or this little experiment, because you probably already know the answer to this. So if we look at the bat and the ball challenge, and this is just a little example, a little experiment to actually see how your brain can actually fool you with something that really looks quite simple. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of sentences. It's about the costs of the bat and the ball, And for those of you that didn't read the book, the Daniel Kahneman book, please respond in the chat and let us know what you think that the answer is to this little challenge. Okay. So here you go. It's about a bet and a ball, and they cost $1.10 in total. The bet costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? How many cents? So please put your answers into the chat, and I'm keen to see here what happens. So don't give yourself 5 minutes to think about it. Don't use a calculator. Okay. See some different answers. 10 cents, 5 cents, 90 cents. Okay. 5, 10. Yeah. People are oscillating a bit between the 10 cents and the 5 cents. Very interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks for those responses. So what is interesting about this particular exercise is that almost everyone that looks at this has an initial tendency to say 10 cents, because the sum of $1.10 separates naturally into the $1 and the 10 cents, and 10 cents is about the right magnitude, right? So that's sort of your gut feel kicking in. So many people will give in to this immediate impulse. And the surprisingly high rate of errors in this problem illustrates how lightly our brain actually deals with this kind of decision making. People are not really accustomed to always think hard. And this is not a judgment, of course, for those of you that provided these answers. I also said 10 cents when I did this exercise first. And even at Harvard, they did this test. And a lot of the students there also said 10 cents. It's just an indication of the two systems that we have got at work in our brain. And I'll tell a little bit more about that in our next slide. But we have to be very careful with being content with a decision that we make based on a plausible judgment that quickly comes to mind. Okay, so the people that did read the book, they will probably smile a bit and go, yes, I remember this chapter. I also answered 10 cents. All right. So how does our brain work with decision making? So Daniel Kahneman actually dissected that quite nicely, which is maybe a bit of a not the right term to use when we talk about brains. But he came up with almost two operating systems. He talks about system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is really, it's fast, it's unconscious, it goes really quick, it's automatic, it's effortless, doesn't use a lot of energy. It does 95% of all our thinking. Whereas on the other hand, system 2 is slow. It really takes its time to think consciously, about decision making, the thinking processes. It's rational. But unfortunately, it only does 5% of all our thinking. So like I said earlier, we are corner cutters. We are satisficers, which is a formal term, by the way, that won somebody a Nobel Prize a long time ago. But that means we like to conserve energy. And when it comes to decision making, we don't like to think too hard always. Okay. So Kahneman's research actually points out that system 2 is really lazy. And essentially a slave to system 1. So when system 1 sends a suggestion to your system 2, it actually, like we had just now with the bet and the ball challenge, system 1 makes you immediately think, oh, cool, that's 10 cents. And then system 2 is actually very quick to believe system 1. Why? Because we like to conserve energy. All right. So what's also interesting in this process is that when it comes to decision making, we are also often hampered by what is called the theory of small numbers. So we like to see relationships and data even when they're not there. Those relationships, causality is often not there. And I wrote a little article about it a couple of years ago when, unfortunately, South Africa lost in I think the 20 over World Cup against New Zealand, and it was quite late at night that this final was actually broadcast, and the next day a lot of people called in sick because they stayed up late. And if you would be very quick to judge that and look for causality, then you could say watching cricket actually makes you sick, which is of course ridiculous. That's not the case. But that's just another example of how our system 1 part of our brain can actually see causalities even when they're not there. Okay. So, and an example also of the theory of small numbers is one of a research done by, what was it, Bill Gates, the Bill Gates Foundation. And he did some research, or they did research into characteristics of successful schools in the United States. And that study found that smaller schools were more successful. And since then, a lot of investments have been made into creating smaller schools. However, the problem with these findings was that the underlying sample sizes were way too small. They looked, for instance, in the state of Pennsylvania, I think, and that's the number of schools was just not really large enough. So the truth is actually that small schools are not better on average. They are simply more variable, if that makes sense. So if the researchers that reported to the Gates Foundation had also asked about the characteristics of worst schools, they would also have found that bad schools also tend to be smaller than average. So what I'm trying to point out here is just that, there are all these processes taking place in our brain, system 1, system 2, the theory of small numbers, and jumping to conclusions or jumping to confusions way too quickly. And this all has an impact on decision making. Yeah, and of course, especially in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, business decision makers are often faced with an increasing number of complex decisions to be made. Think of all sorts of disruptive supply chain forces, increased employee churn, rapidly changing marketplaces, the rise of digital shelf, just to name a few. So making the right decisions has become so much more challenging. Getting back to BI, so do BI reports and dashboards, self-service BI reports and dashboards always help with it? I think it might help a little bit, but it's not sufficient to come up with the answers that we need. All right. So that's enough about BI and an introduction of how our brain works with when it comes to decision making. Let's talk a bit more about decision intelligence as a topic. Okay. So what is decision intelligence actually? So some of you might have done some research already and bumped into people of the likes of Laureen Pratt or Cassie Koselkoff from Google. She writes quite a lot about decision intelligence as well. But in essence, it's really the discipline of turning information into better decisions and therefore actions, but also at large scale, any scale, not just an individual, but reaching hundreds or thousands of end users. And what is really interesting is that I've got a social sciences background as well. And what I like about this field is that it actually combines quantitative aspects, so your data sciences, your statistics, so more the harder mathematical side of this field, but also qualitative aspects, so the decision sciences. It talks about game theory, it talks about even philosophy, it talks to psychology. Game theory, indeed, is very important, prisoner's dilemma, that sort of things. So decision intelligence is a combination of the two, making it maybe a slightly more vague area. And what's interesting about decision intelligence as well is that it's actually highlighted as one of the top data trends, according to Gartner in 2022. And our Amazon of China, Alibaba, sees decision intelligence as their top tech trend priority for this current year. So just to mention a couple of aspects around decision intelligence. Getting back to Gartner, Gartner's omnipresent, of course, not just in terms of magic quadrants, but also with something called the hype cycles. No doubt you all have seen hype cycles in the past. But what's very interesting about decision intelligence is that Gartner has put the decision intelligence on 3 of their current hype cycles. Like it says here, AI, data and analytics, and emerging tech in finance. So what is interesting, if you, I hope it's big enough on your screen, but decision intelligence, you can actually see here, sort of in the middle, of the innovation trigger slope at the beginning of the hype cycle, with an expectation of it reaching the plateau of productivity in 2 to 5 years. Yeah, so that's actually fairly soon if you look at it. Even though decision intelligence has been around for quite some time, and I know that Howard and JG in the introduction talked a bit about decision support as well. I mean, that's what I studied when I did my BCom informatics equivalent, I guess, in the Netherlands. It was called decision support. And it looks a bit like, oh, we're full circle going around again to decision support, which is very interesting. So decision intelligence, in a way, has been around for a long time, but really translating that into better actions and better decisions, really with impact for the organization. That is the main focus of decision intelligence as the topic that we're talking about here. So it is a practical discipline used to improve decision making by really understanding and especially engineering. So I'll get back to that engineering component, how decisions are made in an organization, you know, with a group of people, how outcomes are evaluated, and how you improve your feedback cycles when it comes to decision making. Okay. So it really makes sense from a business perspective to keep ad hoc gut feel kind of decisions that are very siloed and disjointed to a minimum, actually, yeah, and focus a bit more on what we call harmonizing collective decision making across an entire organization. So maybe an interesting example that I would like to mention here is that so when it comes to how organizations are structured, it's often a response to a complexity in an environment, right? So I don't know if you guys know Henry Mintzberg with his organizational typologies, but he talks about machine bureaucracies and an entrepreneurial organization. He's got a couple of these typologies. And it really is an answer to you know, how your environment is structured. But with this particular structure also come departments and bringing in silos into your organization. And then decisions consecutively get actually made within each of those silos. Now, a great example, many years ago, I did a project for an organization, and their results weren't the greatest. They were actually year on year going down by a significant percentage, and they were wondering, why is this the case? And it was around the time that Eli Goldratt also was quite popular with his theory of constraints, saying instead of having hundreds of KPIs and measurements across the whole business, you should actually work towards having one KPI that everybody contributes to. So prior to that thinking, this particular business actually had, for instance, depot managers sending trucks to other warehouses and getting their full bonus, which was based on how many trucks you would send. But nobody was actually thinking about, hold on, is anybody actually measuring if these trucks are full? So what actually happened was that you know, these depot managers were just sending half empty trucks, thereby cashing in on their monthly bonus based on targets that they achieve with number of trucks that are moving around. But the overall result, of course, is not great. So that's an example of how silo decision making can actually lead to very inefficient overarching business results. Okay. Okay, according to Gartner, there are also some interesting decision intelligence tools that are making their entry into the market. So some examples are Quantelia, Tellius, Domo. There's a whole host of them, and they're all trying to make these kind of decision-making processes a bit easier. Okay, so, but you don't need to throw tools, of course, at the topic of decision intelligence. You can also look at something that's called the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which was introduced by William Deming quite a long time ago, and I'll get back to that just now. And we can also look at decision intelligence from a more engineering angle, you know, where you can actually engineer decision-making processes that have got a bit of a bigger reach than just your single link horizon, as we call it, within your own department. Okay. So no presentation. Before we get to that, no presentation is complete, of course, with a little bit of ChatGPT in it. JG mentioned it just now in the intro as well. So I just put a little bit here in of what ChatGPT actually thinks that decision intelligence is. And it really is indeed about decision-making processes, supporting that and improving the quality and speed of that to increase the chances of success. So there's a whole lot more to it, more accurate, more timely, but I think ChatGPT has got a fairly decent definition here when it comes to decision intelligence. All right. So how can you get started with this? So like I said just now, you don't need to just throw tools at decision intelligence in your organization. You can start with something as simple as the plan, do, check, act cycle. So I mentioned William Deming just now. I'm a big fan of his work. He came up with great slogans like, please bring me data, because without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And if we go with an opinion, I'll go with my opinion. Okay, he had a whole host of other great quotes, but basically William Deming was the person that single-handedly helped Japan rise from the ashes of the Second World War with his total quality management approach, which was very statistically driven, very data-driven. So he's a real data hero. And his plan, do, check, act cycle can actually be used to properly embed decision intelligence in any business. So where does it start? So you've got a plan, do, check, act cycle, and I've got some examples of that just now in the next couple of slides. But what you want is, over time, you want your business to improve, right? By making the right decisions, taking the right actions based on those decisions, you want to see business improvement. But if that's a sort of a slope that is slanted upwards, how do you actually go up? Continuous improvement would mean that that wheel of that plan, do, check, act cycle actually needs to roll up on an ongoing basis. So what we have to make sure is that at various points in time, we actually anchor and we consolidate through standardization and proper adaptation of the decisions and actions that we take in our organization. So that is supported then by decision intelligence. Decision intelligence can make the incline of that slope of business improvement steeper, and you can get more quickly to a certain rate of business improvement. And that can happen at any level in your organization. Okay, let's have a look at some tangible examples. So one of them is avoiding out of stock situations, as an example. So how do we go about this? We plan. So we are going to ask ourselves the question, does real-time visibility in stock levels avoid out-of-stock situations? So think of a retailer, right? So no retailer wants to have out-of-stock situations because it means you can't sell stuff, right? So you want to have as much stock from that perspective as possible. Okay, cool. So we plan for that. What we do then is we implement maybe a BI environment with the necessary information to a test group. Yeah, so we focus on a couple of outlets maybe, and we give them these fantastic Power BI reports, or Tableau, ClickView, whatever your flavor is. And then we're going to check, we're going to see, we're going to monitor. Are these people, this test group, are they actually getting better results than stores compared to stores without that information? Now, we act upon that then, that if this initiative is successful, then we would like to anchor that and implement it. Or it could be that it's not successful and it needs to be changed, or we just completely can the problem in its own way completely. So like I said, if successful, we roll it out to all stores and monitor successful decisions on an ongoing basis. The next step then would be to optimize stock levels. So for a retailer, you also don't want to have an unlimited amount of stock, because there are certain risks that come with that as well. You have to have your stock levels insured. What if your warehouses go up in flames? It's a lot of risk that you're exposing yourself to. So the question then is not only how can I prevent out of stock situations, but the next step is how do I optimize stock levels? So in a similar fashion, you can go through this and say, okay, how do we optimize this so that we don't carry too much stock? Again, we implement decision intelligence models to a test group that can prescribe optimal stock levels and when to order what quantities. We monitor this again and we check successful, yes, no, does it need to be changed, or do we need to throw this initiative away? And then we anchor it and we roll it out. Okay, so this can happen at any point in time. You can apply it in your own space, in your own office environment, at home. So I would really recommend sort of applying this kind of thinking when it comes to decision-making processes to get a bit more familiar with it and make it an integral part of your day-to-day activities. All right. Just a bit of an example decision intelligence project that we've carried out. So this is an example where we use sensor data that's consuming data from different sensors in a manufacturing environment. We consume that via an event hub, and it gets fed into predictive decision intelligence models. So this information is then made available to decision makers via stream analytics, a database, and dashboards. But as you can see in this top part here, there is still a human actor involved, right? That needs to come to a decision, but the information is prepared in the best possible way. Okay, there's still somebody that needs to push a button and say, we need to close this mine shaft, or we need to stop this product line, or whatever the case might be. So what the scenario here as well is that this then needs to be fed into a decision engine that actually looks at various input response combinations. So in the mining industry, as an example, you've got certain trigger action response plans already that are quite detailed. And that is an example of a decision engine. And an application would then actually make a decision on your behalf. That decision gets fed back into an event hub. And that then leads to a whole range of actions that can either be automated or semi-automated with human actors involved. Okay. All right. Now we get to some nice meatier sort of engineering concepts when it comes to decision engineering. But before we get into this, just want to sense check. Are there any questions so far? Very quiet with these kind of sessions. Everybody's listening with lots of intent.
So, Erwin, there have been some, so definitely some questions, but I do think that it would be an opportunity for you to run through and then we'd loop through. But there's been great, great conversation in the chat. So maybe we just continue like that, if that's okay.
Super. Yeah. Let's carry on, and then we can get into the conversation. Indeed. Yeah. All right. So if we look at this, so there's a great book written by a lady called Loreen Pratt, and she came up with the concept of the causal decision diagram. And this is where the engineering part of decisions comes in. So what she actually introduced with these kind of diagrams is that you've got certain choices that a decision maker can control on the left-hand side. So that's called a decision lever. And an outcome on the right-hand side of the diagram is an element that actually indicates success of a decision, right? It's a certain outcome that you're after, that you want to see. An intermediate is then a step in between, as the term actually indicates. That is a link between a decision lever and the outcome. Okay, but it's not really a decision or an outcome itself in its own right. Okay, and then an external is, as the name also indicates, is an element over which you as a decision maker do not have any control. All right, so this is sort of the diagram. These diagrams can get very complex depending on the nature of the decision to be made. And maybe at this point as well, it's worthwhile actually saying that this kind of engineering of decisions is very useful for high impact, low frequency decision-making processes. because you don't want to go probably through a process like this every single day, because it would just be analysis paralysis maybe. So you always have to find that right balance. Whereas the plan, do, check, act cycle can work really well for higher frequency decision-making processes. Okay. Now, nothing works better than having a worked out example, for instance. So here we go. So I've got a Nestle example. There's a bit of context to this. During my studies, long time ago, I was always fascinated by ethics in businesses. So I can tell you all stories about Ford and the Ford Pinto and the rupturing petrol tank, for instance, in accidents, and how accountants can make horrible decisions. And Nestle was another interesting example that I really enjoyed, not because of what happened, of course, but just from an business ethics case perspective. So we have to go back to the 70s here. And in the 70s, there was a big Nestle boycott. Yeah. Social responsibility awareness really took off in the United States in the 1970s. There was a concept of social contracts between businesses and society that was formally declared. And that led to a big scandal, and Nestle was actually boycotted around that time as well. So how this decision causal decision diagram actually works is it starts with a lever on the left-hand side. Okay, a choice. Do we want to sell baby formula in African countries? Okay, so the external that I've put in here at the beginning of this diagram is that there are certain stakeholder expectations, yeah, that are actually made or formulated outside of the decision makers themselves, you know, that have to make a decision about, do we want to sell baby formula in African countries? So what stakeholder expectations was that there's going to be an expected increase in profits. So the intermediates there are, of course, then an expected increase in revenue, and there will be an expected increase in cost. But that leads then to an outcome of expected increase in profits, you know, provided that the increase in revenue is higher than the increase in costs. Now you see there a dotted line in the middle, which is actually what Lorraine Pratt calls a single link visibility horizon. Okay, so this is a perfect example of having a fairly siloed decision-making process. So engineering this kind of decision has to actually take a couple of more steps. We have to think beyond the obvious, so to speak. Because if you look at this then, against that social background as well, an external concept here was the poverty levels in African countries. And an intermediate here as well was that mothers were trying to save on the monthly cost of an expensive product. Because if you look at it, Nestle was introducing something that was actually a relatively expensive product. So that, combined with a sort of rise in awareness in the general public of these kind of social contracts, meant that there was a much bigger emphasis in the general public of looking at the infant malnutrition that happened, because mothers were trying to save. So instead of using maybe 1 scoop per 250 mils of water of baby formula, they would use 1 scoop per liter, for instance. So it led to infant malnutrition. And together with the outcry from the public, that led to a loss of reputation, loss of business, and lower profits. It is maybe not the nicest of examples, but it is a real example that really helped, sort of like highlighting the importance of these kind of decisions, and that you can't just make decisions based on stakeholder expectations about profits, for instance, you know, which might make sense when you look at it in this context. But in the 70s, that was definitely not looked at in this light. So I hope that this example actually gives you a bit of an idea of how you can put a causal decision diagram together, a CDD, for a decision that actually has got a bit of a bigger impact, you know, than you would expect. Now, when it comes to the possible use of ML, so machine learning models can help, of course, with these kind of decision models. So the way we like to look at models like this, or machine learning models, is that they help with single link visibility horizons. We like to look at these machine learning models in isolation. So we like to predict what would the increase in revenue be if we do X, Y, Z. And a model is maybe very good at predicting that. Or what's the increase in cost, and then what is the expected increase in profit, etc., etc. But what is really important is that we start to learn to look at these kind of steps from a holistic perspective. So we have to get rid of organizational silos where these kind of decisions are made purely in a finance department, and then in a marketing department, and then in a manufacturing department or a supply chain department. These things really have to be looked at in a holistic manner and need to be engineered in that manner. All right, cool. So this is the last slide, apart from the thank you and some contact details. So the end is in sight. I promise you it's not death by PowerPoint. But some final thoughts here. So business intelligence and decision intelligence can really, really coexist in that full holistic analytical landscape. The need for BI doesn't disappear. So that's also why in the beginning I said BI has maybe not always led to the results that we were expecting, because it still delivers good results where you are looking for descriptive and diagnostic analytics. What happened, looking in the rearview mirror and understanding maybe why that happened. Yeah. However, we need to become more precise and more factual with our insight-driven actions at high speed, high velocity, and that's really where decision intelligence excels. So we also have to be more intentional with our decision-making processes. So we spoke a bit about system 1 and 2 in our brain. So we really have to look for processes that engage our system 2 more. And ways of doing that is by explicitly using that plan, do, check, act cycle that we had a look at, and by really engineering these kind of causal decision diagrams. I already mentioned focusing on the complete picture across silos instead of looking at each decision or smaller step in isolation, which leads to incomplete results. And what I would like to see as well is that there's more of a culture that starts to take shape, which is not just data-driven. Data-driven, the cultures has been a major topic at the last IT Web conference as well, the BI Summit that JG and I presented at. You could see that there was a huge amount of focus on data-driven cultures. But I would like to raise the bar a little bit more there by saying it would be great to actually not just focus on being data-driven in your culture, but build out a decision-driven culture. And if I look at that point prior to this, it's great if organizations start to discuss decisions more often. What were good decisions that were made last month? What were bad decisions that are made last week? What worked? What didn't work? Let's celebrate good decisions, and let's make that sort of more aware, make people aware of these kind of things. And that will go a long way in actually embedding decision making into an organization, and become better at taking those decisions. So there's a lot more that can be said about this. There's a lot more material written about it, and that's it basically from my side. So
Erwin, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Erwin, thank you so much. Maybe that's a great slide that you can just leave there, because it really gives us some good segues for discussion. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and your passion for this topic came through really clearly. Just feel like we've been really spoiled with respect to someone who has deep knowledge and experience in this field, sharing this topic with us. So really thank you for that. In terms of some of the questions, I'm going to just refer to them, because I think you elicited a really lots of debate when you raised the topic of the qualitative biases and Caesware. You posed a couple of questions. Caesware, it was almost as if you were grappling at a business level in terms of how do you drive this behavior? I thought that you really touched on, Erwin, you really touched on a lot of those. I love the point that you raised on a retrospective at the end here. But Sizwe, maybe I can ask you, just maybe pose your question. Maybe you can reflect on some of the things that Erwin covered. If there were some things that he didn't, I'd love you to just pose that and let's maybe debate that. So Sizwe, are you still on the call?
Yes, JG, but I have to drop now, unfortunately.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
No problem. But I'm gonna, if you're okay with that, I'm gonna pick up one of the questions that you raised. But thank you for joining and thank you for your participation in the chat. We're really great to have you on the call and hope to see you again next week. So
Thanks,
Erwin,
Ray.
one of the questions that Sizwe posed was an understanding of how organizations can catalog their decisions and adopt the strategies in the way in which everyone in the organizations feel that they've had some part in the stream to contribute to the decisions. And I really felt that the point that you raised at the end was this retrospective. Can you give us an example of maybe one of your clients where you've used this approach and you can just kind of just give us insights as to how that discussion went?
Yes, yeah, it's a very good point, because that really talks to implementing that decision-driven culture in an organization. And it really starts with, I guess, as well, having a more open mindset about being honest about decisions that maybe didn't lead to the right results, which is something maybe as human beings we tend to, shovel under the carpet maybe a bit. It's not something you want to shout off the rooftops. But in an environment where it's okay to discuss these things and it's a safe environment, there's so many learnings that you can get from that. So some of the platforms that are coming out now in decision intelligence, they offer a lot of collaborative space to actually centrally collect decisions, and the various decision makers across the organization can get insights into these kind of decisions. So it's very much like having a metadata catalog, if I talk in DAMA terms as well, of decisions that were made and keeping a track record of that. But in one of our organizations, one of our clients that we're dealing with, they haven't, for instance, implemented a decision intelligence tool per se, but they do keep track of these things in a simple decision log, just like we do for normal projects, where you keep track of a decision register. There's a Teams environment where people collaborate, and that's where decisions are being centrally stored and discussed. So that is definitely a way to actually ramp up and scale before you, for instance, make the leap into a decision intelligence tool, because that is an investment. And I'm not a big fan of throwing tools immediately at a problem without solving a process element as well. Yeah.
Super, thanks, Erwin. Howard, hand up.
Yeah, so JG, I've just put some content in the chat box, and so from the object management group, they have built what's called a decision model and notation, where you can model your decisions using something that they use for business process, so BPM, MN, as well as DMN. So that's a very nice way of defining what processes are taking place within the organization, and that's a formal modeling technique like data modeling. So there's some really nice stuff that also goes in terms of saying, well, what input data is required, what other decisions is it made up of, and I liked what Erwin referred to as that almost that one measurement, one metric, and almost the decisions, how they impact each other. One needs to be aware of this relationship.
Yeah, what's nice about those kind of modeling and annotation techniques, Howard, it just creates a bit more of an engineering aspect to decisions that would otherwise be made by gut feel or without any involvement from someone else.
Right.
And it's a means of sharing these kind of models with other people as well, and having a healthy debate about whether that decision tree that you're actually following in how you're making those decisions, if that's the right path that you're taking. It's a great debate. Yeah. And it starts with making it visible.
And what I like as well is when we teach people to do data quality expectations, specifically on BI, and we understand that that is fit for purpose. Well, what is that purpose? The purpose is that it should be helping people make a decision. And if you don't
Correct.
understand what that is, well, then what is the report for? Or is it just for some form of ETL that people could get into Excel and then do the stuff that they need to do? So many times the reports are more a extraction mechanism than they're actually there to deliver something. And so, yes, we need a decision inventory and understanding of those decisions and then focusing on what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Erwin, maybe just to Goshe, I thought it was really interesting, a point that you raised where you said biases are certainly an important aspect of this of decision support, and earlier you mentioned that the qualitative analytics is where the biases can be filtered or identified. Goshe, I'd love you to just share your thinking there, and maybe there's a question or just a comment.
Thanks. It's something maybe philosophical, whatever that big word is, but
Philosophical.
Yes, yes, thanks. That one. So it's about that. So for me, can a human firstly be objective? That's the first thing. So perception. So that's the first one I want. That's just putting it into the mind thought that I have, because everything that you touch is an object, but when you see it, you see it through your eyes. So you can be colorblind or whatever the case might be. You couldn't see some things. So it's for me as a very subjective thing. So the other thing is the biasness. Your biasness is something that is it's something that can be quantifiable. And biases is, if, for example, I mean, all milk is bad. That's a bias. So all cattle milk is bad. That's a bias in this country, but it's not a bias in the other countries. So if you think about that, that filters also some of your decision making. So when you go into your, you've got your technical data that you have, but then you also have your subjective data where you then have your biases, which is then inherently put into the system somewhere. So where would one find something like that, and that biases be part of the decision making outcome process rather than on a decision maker to make that call, because then all the biasness has been excluded out. Milk is not dangerous for people that has got that kind of biases. There's a lot of biases, and I think that's all an abstraction of what the reality is. So yeah, that's all kind of in a circle kind of discussion point I'm trying to make.
I think
Thanks. It's a very interesting discussion.
No, absolutely. Thanks for that comment and the questions and the feedback. I think maybe to get back to how you started off as well. I don't think that anybody can be completely objective. So what the theory of perception, that little experiment we did in the beginning, what that actually highlighted is that we think we all are very objective and we can describe certain elements around us, whether it's data or tangible objects that you can see with your eyes, in very objective ways, and think that we are objective and still be very different to how somebody else describes that thing. So what is the nice thing about the topic of decision intelligence, I guess, is that, and the modeling techniques that were brought up just now as well, and the engineering aspects, is that it actually elevates the decision-making processes that are otherwise very tacit in people's brains, and the assumptions that are being made is that these are lifted into an explicit manner. It's visible for people so that you can have a healthy discussion about it. In other words, by us discussing, gosh, why do you see a frog in that picture, and why do I see a horse in that picture? and that we understand each other, that there are actually two different angles to this, and how that possibly impacts the decisions that we make, about whatever action needs to be taken, or whatever the desired outcome is. So long story short, I think this is a very sort of like explicit process to make any of these kind of steps in a decision-making cycle very explicit.
Because that will
Thank you, Erwin.
reduce, thank you, maybe just a last point on that, is it will reduce the gut feeling. I mean, your gut feel is basically your biasness. So if you reduce that, that will probably help people in their decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is probably a certain attitude concept where, I mean, I often talk about a scout mindset, for instance, where we really have to be open to like what biases do we have inside us, and really try to engage system 2 and not just system 1. So it's very important to properly listen to people and be aware of what's going on inside you when you make decisions, and as a group of people, what's going on when you're making decisions. Yeah.
Thanks, Erwin. Absolutely. I think that what's come clear to, or what I feel like your presentation has really helped with, is the power is in the decisioning process, which then gets retrospectively considered. And I think that as a business, we are stronger when we have varying views. And so the power is a decision based on, for me to be able to share my context is more powerful than for me to be right, because the chances are high that we need to be together to get all of our decisions right. I can't get them all right. I'm going to lose at some point. So I think that that's really helpful. Is the context of a decision is it must be helpful. It doesn't have to be right, because sometimes they can't be. So Howard, I'm going to just maybe ask for you to your hands up. Maybe you can also just wrap for us. I think we're almost at 20 past. So Howard, could you maybe let's have the last question, and then maybe you can wrap for us. And
Thanks,
Terence
JG.
has also got a question.
Okay, let Terence go, and then I'll try to wrap
Okay,
up after Terence.
then will you wrap? Thank you, Terence.
Hi, Erwin. Just a quick question. Earlier in your presentation, you showed a Gartner quadrant with all the companies in it, where it showed the ability to execute, if I remember correctly.
Correct, yeah. I'm just going back a couple of slides.
Thanks.
Yeah, this one here.
That's
Oh,
it.
sorry.
Yeah.
This one. Yeah.
This one. Yeah. Do you know if this was done on, like, because I see they specify Tableau for Salesforce. For the rest of the companies, was it done on like a holistic offering, or was it done specifically on just Power BI for Microsoft, and Data Studio for Google, for instance, or was it done like for the whole offering in terms of like Synapse and Power BI, and you know what I mean?
Okay, I see where you're coming from. Yes, good question, Terence. So there are different magic quadrants for different areas, so to speak. So when you talk about Synapse, Azure Synapse, for instance, which is more like massive parallel processing technologies, which is similar to Amazon Redshift, for instance. That is a different magic quadrant. So the magic quadrant that we are looking at here is purely for BI platforms.
Okay, cool, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, Terence, if you look at their papers, they're very good at explaining the criteria they use to evaluate the vendors. So if you do go there, go and look at their criteria. They're excellent at being clear on all of the different areas that they evaluate, from maintenance, support, all the different things. So it's helpful to go to that before you can clearly read what's on this paper.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, they're very good papers. Cool.
Erwin, so the last question I had is a lot of this thing, and I think what's important is that there are times for gut decisions, and it's very dependent on the state of the information that you have. And I put in the chat, there's something called Cynefin that I like to use to understand what the state of information is that we have. And a great example of that was COVID, where people were trying to make decisions, but they had very little data to make decisions on, and trying to use the data. And in those cases, it does call for making an intuitive decision and going with it. And I think we need to put the data into these areas and then understand the type of decision processes that we can use to be able to get there. So I always feel that it's that context as well in terms of the state of information that you have before applying whichever technique you use to make a decision.
That's a very interesting angle indeed. I mean, there's always a place for gut feel. I mean, when you're running away from a lion on the African savannah, you're not going to build a causal decision diagram. So I guess based on the outcome, preservation of your own life, you know, that you need to actually decide maybe a sort of like a meta model for your decision making. You know, do you go plan, do, check, act? Do you go causal decision diagram, or do you go gut feel? You know, if you look at like a rough, sort of like categorization.
And there's even one area where they actually advise you not to make any decisions because of the state of your data. So, so what I like to do is I like the decision making, but once you analyze your understanding of the cause and effect and the state of the information, unknown unknowns and knowns unknowns, you need to position the decisions in these areas. And Cynefin has a really nice way of moving the decisions around, and then first of all setting the context of whether you can make these decisions. But I think I really like what you've done in terms of just wrapping up. I think it's great. I've been following Lauren Pratt for some time. I really like the work she's been doing. So nice for you to elevate it and then also to bring it back to a case of saying, guys, what decisions are we making? How are we engineering our decisions? I think JG and I were using the same thing in terms of data delivering value, being data driven. We need to engineer the value. We can't just get there one day and we've got value, or we make a decision. And I suppose for decisions, it's harder because you can just, well, let's just make a gut decision. Whereas value, it's a lot harder to get that. But thank you very much. JG, anything from your side?
No, I'll just thank you again, Erwin. Such a privilege to have such awesome people in our community and so willing to share. And I want to invite everybody next week for a really exciting time with the lawyer. And it's going to be the most exciting, it's going to be a great session where we're going to be able to just really get into the mind of how does the legal fraternity engage and overlap with how we need to go about making decisions, and where's liability and how does it look, and data completeness and so on. Just the ethics in and around data, but the full 360 perspective. So look forward to welcoming everybody next week. But Erwin, awesome to have you, and great knowing that we're working in the same space. We love your work, love your company. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erwin.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Absolutely. And I've got a thank you slide as well, of course. Just need to get through all of the slides. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Erwin. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And have a